Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, dear colleagues from all over the world. My name is Naira Romanova, and I am Head of Drug Safety Monitoring Department at National Medicine Regulatory Authority of Ministry of Health of Armenia, and I am very happy to facilitate this conference for Europe region. Thank you to each of you for being here with us today. We hope that all of you and your families are well and safe during this complex time in the middle of COVID-19 pandemic. And on behalf of International Society of Pharmacovigilance, we are very pleased to welcome to all of you to the second edition of the ISoP Patient Safety Day event that will be held on two journeys, today on September 16th and tomorrow on September 17th. The World Health Organization established the Patient Safety Day to increase public engagement in healthcare safety and promote global action to prevent and reduce avoidable harm in healthcare. This year, WHO is promoting safe maternal and newborn care. The ISoP supports this idea to promote patient safety, especially in medication use, and we include more relevant topics around medication safety for promoting a global action to prevent and reduce medication risks. Please join us in our different sessions as well. And as you already know, last year we had more than 30,000 people joining us by synchronic and recording sessions, and we hope to continue this successful promotion on medication safety every year. So before we go to the presentations, I would like to give a floor to ISoP President Mira Harrison, who will address a few words to all of you. Please listen to her.
Welcome to this webinar organised by the International Society of Pharmacovigilance for World Patient Safety Day 2021. My name is Mira Harrison-Woolrich and I'm the President of ISoP. Our professional society is a worldwide organisation with several hundred members working in pharmacovigilance. Our aim is to promote the safe use of pharmaceutical products in all countries. World Patient Safety Day was established by the WHO in 2019, and it's marked on the 17th of September each year. It's an important day for ISoP because it promotes patient safety as a global public health priority. Every year, millions of patients die from an adverse event, and many of these are related to pharmaceutical products. This year, with the continuing COVID-19 pandemic, global awareness of medicines and vaccine safety has been extremely high. The everyday work of those of us in pharmacovigilance has made international headlines on a regular basis. ISoP members work in very many different sectors, from drug development, medicines regulation, academia, to pharmaceutical companies. And for all of us, the end point of our work is patient safety. Every issue analysed and discussed is meaningless unless we consider how it impacts on the patient themselves using medicines in their own environment. Drug safety issues also affect the family and friends, including children and carers of patients using medicines. I'd encourage you to think about this broader holistic approach as you watch this webinar today. The WHO theme for World Patient Safety Day this year is maternal and newborn health. So please remember this because it is especially relevant. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you enjoy this webinar that we've made for World Patient Safety Day. We hope you find it interesting and informative. If you work in pharmacovigilance and you'd like to join ISoP, please have a look at our website, isoponline.org, and consider making a membership application. We would welcome you in joining our professional society so we can all work together towards improving patient safety worldwide.
So this was a welcome speech from Mira Harrison, ISoP President, and thank you for your attention. Also, I want to invite you to show your participation in social media. It is known that internet and social media are yet to play a major role in drug safety and pharmacovigilance, and the appropriate use of this tool elevates the role of medication safety to a more strategic level and drive better outcomes in medication safety. So please, publishing your pictures or ideas about medication safety topics, use the hashtags ISoPPSD 2021, ISoP Medication Safety, ISoPMeter, World Patient Safety Day. Now, let me go to the presentation and introduce you our honorable speakers. One of our speakers of this session, Professor Dr. Santiago Schiaffino, Regional PV Head EM LATAM at Boehringer Ingelheim, who will present his conference entitled Evaluating Medication Use and Adverse Event During Lactation, What Everyone Should Know. Dr. Santiago Schiaffino is a Master of Science, pediatrician, and clinical pharmacologist, Doctor of Medicine, International Society of Pharmacovigilance Fellowship Master in Safety of Medicine, Pharmacovigilance and Post-Authorization Studies, University of Seville, Spain, Specialist in Clinical Pharmacology and Specialist in Pediatrics Medicine School, University of Buenos Aires, Argentina, Fellowship on Safety and Efficacy of Medicines, Pharmacovigilance Department at National Administration of Medicine, Food and Medical Technology, Ministry of Health of Argentina. So, dear colleagues, we invite you to participate actively on this session. If you have any question, please do not hesitate to put them into the chat pod on the left. We will be responding some of them according to our schedule, and the rest of them will be collected, and then question and answer list will be published in ISoP webpage at www.isoponline.org. Now, without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Dr. Santiago Schiaffino.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Santiago Schiaffino. I will have the opportunity to discuss with you a really interesting topic regarding drug use during lactation. First of all, I need to thank you to the organizers, because for me as a pediatrician, being here is really a pleasure. So I will go to the title of the presentation, is Evaluating Medication Use and Adverse Event During Lactation, What Everyone Should Know. I would like to declare my conflict of interest. I am full-time employee by BI, and I don't have any additional potential conflict of interest relevant to this dissertation. And the view expressed here should not be understood or quotes as being made on behalf of the company that I am working for. So first of all, I want to start with what is the World Patient Safety Day. This is a campaign from WHO that supports the objective of enhancing global understanding of patient safety in order to increase public engagement and promote global action to prevent, reduce avoidable harm during health care. This year, the topic selected by WHO is dedicated to the need to prioritize and address safety during maternal and newborn care. I would like to provide you some background regarding this topic. It's important to mention that there are over 200 million pregnancies worldwide each year, and about 50 of them are here in Europe. The breastfeeding is the cornerstone of child survival, nutrition, and development. So an early incorporation and preserved breastfeeding is essential for maternal and newborn care. It's important to mention that avoiding unnecessary discontinuation of breastfeeding due to lack of information regarding the exposure through drug use is a key milestone for all stakeholders. I would like to start with some regulatory environment so you know where we are nowadays. Scientists and regulators in Europe and in the United States continue to seek methods and strategies to improve knowledge regarding rational use of medicine for pregnant and breastfeeding population. And this will be the topic that I will address today. We know that regulatory agents have made strides toward improvement, but much more is needed. And first thing is to recognize the importance of international collaboration in order to achieve this. we must consider how to address these important public health issues more globally. And in this slide, you have a table for a really nice publication from February this year about how we should assure the access to safe medicine during pregnancy and breastfeeding. And you could see since year 2014, all the health authority nominated here are doing activities in order to improve the safety of this special population. I will start with Emma, what is doing, and I would like to paraphrase the executive director for Emma, Guido Rassi, and he announced during a workshop conducted last year that we need a paradigm shift in the way how marketing authorization holders develop, how the regulators approve the medicine that may be used by pregnant and breastfeeding women. We need to generate more data on medicine safety during pregnancy and breastfeeding in clinical trials, and also integrate real-world evidence into decision-making in a faster way. And each of us has a role to help create this change on the benefit of women and their children. This is a really, really important words provided by Emma, Executive Director. Following these, Emma drafted a strategy for better research into the benefits and risks of medicine in pregnancy and breastfeeding. And the aim is to obtain evidence on medicine use and safety for pregnant and breastfeeding women, and enable better decision-making on medical treatment. We are being called to use all relevant tools to generate more data on the benefits and risks. And there is a clear consensus that while it is justified to exclude pregnant and breastfeeding women in the earliest stage of clinical development, the participation should, however, be considered always during later stage. Emma is currently developing a GBP chapter to especially address medicine safety monitoring in pregnant and breastfeeding, with the aim to minimize adverse outcome from medicine use without unnecessary withholding useful treatment options for the woman. FDA in United States during 2018 launched a task force that recommended 15 points about the research and development of cell therapeutic for pregnant and breastfed women. This was followed in 2020 with a really robust implementation plan that you could feel here, in where clinical lactation studies and specific consideration for a study design were included. Also, it's important to mention that in February this year, there was an internal coalition of medicine regulatory authority workshop in where FDA, EMA, MHRA, and other health authority discuss how the international collaboration and how the experience that we obtained recently from COVID-19 should be leveraged in order to support a global strategy for collecting systemic data for this patient population. I would like to introduce now the Imi Conception Consortium. This is a consortium between public and private sector in where a lot of important activities are being done. Why they are doing this? Because it's been identified that less than 5% of medication are being adequately monitoring, test, and labeled for use in pregnant and breastfeeding. The fragmentation and the misinformation result in confusing and contradictory communication, and also a not proper perception of the risk by healthcare professionals and also for women and their families. One of the main aims of this consortium is to deliver knowledge, tools, and resources to plug this massive data gap so that breastfeeding women and healthcare providers can take an informed decision about whether it's really safe or not. And by establishing a trust ecosystem that can efficiently and systematically and in an ethical, responsible manner generate and disseminate reliable evidence-based knowledge. This will be achieved by generating, linking, collecting, and analyze data from pharmacovigilance, modeling, routine healthcare, and especially breast milk samples through a large network. This conception consortium, especially the work package 3, is working now in analyze the three current models that we have in order to answer the question if we need a new way for studying which medicines can be taken safely while breastfeeding. And the three models that we know is the first, the in vitro model, then the computer-based models, and finally the animals model. And the answer to this is that we need to use three of them in order to obtain the proper information that we need to use the product safe during breastfeeding. And in this link, you will find a really nice video in where one of the scientists of this consortium is explaining and providing detail about what is the scope of this project. I would like also to present you another consortium, this time from UK. It's called Safe Medicine in Pregnancy and Breastfeeding Information Consortium. And this was the last information about the strategy published last January. And if you could see in the slide that there are a lot of stakeholders, also from private and public institutions working together in order to obtain the information that is needed for support the use of medication during pregnancy and breastfeeding, and also to provide health care supporting breastfeeding for pregnant women. The vision of this consortium is that all women will have access to accurate and accessible information in order to make informed decisions together with the healthcare provider about taking medicine before or during pregnancy and breastfeeding. Which is the goal of this consortium is to ensure that the information provided is up to date with the latest robust evidence available. Also agree key message for communication by all the members organizations, support enhanced education of healthcare providers concerning use of medicine before and during pregnancy and breastfeeding, and also to be open and transparent where the evidence regarding the risk does not exist. Okay, after this intro about which are the initiatives already ongoing, about how to deal with this gap of information, I would like to provide some background about breastfeeding. First of all, WHO recommends exclusive breastfeeding for the first months of life, followed by continued breastfeeding with appropriate complementary food up to 2 years or beyond. In 2012, the World Health Assembly endorsed a comprehensive information plan on maternal, infant, and young child nutrition, specifying 6 global nutrition targets for 2025. And one of them was to include the increased rate of exclusive breastfeeding for the first month up at least 50%. Where are we now? So the last data from the period of 2015 to 2020 shows that 45% of infants between up to 6 months old were exclusive breastfeed. So we are still behind the goal. It's important to mention that scaling up breastfeeding can prevent an estimated 800,000 child deaths every year. And this is a quite impressive number. Breastfeeding promotion is important in both rich and poor countries and might contribute achievement to the forthcoming Sustainable Development Goals. To continue with some background about breastfeeding, we are not talking here about benefit for the children. We are also talking about benefit for the nursing mother, and which are there. First of all, there is a more rapid uterine involution, and this decrease the postpartum blood loss, also reduce the fertility for the mother during this period, also decrease the risk of breast and premenopausal ovarian cancer, type 1 and type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and possible osteoporosis and hip fracture later in life. Not breastfeeding or the early cessation of breastfeeding also results in a higher risk of maternal postpartum depression. And this is one of the main risks for the psychological health in the mother. Also, it has been shown that the annual excess deaths in United States attributable to suboptimal breastfeeding are about 3,300, and of these, 78% are maternal. This excess morbidity leads to considerable costs for parents and for the healthcare system itself. Now, I would like to continue with some key facts regarding breastfeeding and medication use. So we know that medicine are often needed by breastfeeding women, and recent data show that at least more than 90% of women will receive at least one medication during the first week after delivery. And the lack of ambiguous information about the safety of medicine transferred to breast milk might lead to a decision to discontinue breastfeeding, especially for newer drugs. This overcaution approach might be unnecessary in many cases because only a small proportion of medication are contraindicated during breastfeeding or even associated with adverse events on the infants. Special consideration should be given to the benefit of risk of harm of treatment in both the mother and the child, as well as the harm of non-initiate on continuing therapy. We know that the mothers in several cases need to continue the therapy that start during pregnancy, or even for mothers that are suffering from chronic disease, they need to continue medications that were introduced before. The most important thing that we need to consider here is that we must avoid that benefits of breastfeeding for the mother and the infant are lost unnecessarily. Current and comprehensive information is now available in the internet. We have a lot of resources, including now apps for mobile device. One of the examples that we include is LactMed, is one of the more used worldwide from the NIH. It's also important to mention, especially for us that we are doing pharmacovigilance, is that collecting data to inform safe use of drug during lactation is an important public health issue. To continue with the key facts regarding medication use, it's important for the healthcare provider that taking only a few simple precautions in drug selection and considering the infant age, breastfeeding rarely needs to be discouraged or discontinued when a mother needs a therapy. According to the American Academy of Pediatrics, healthcare providers should weigh always the risks and benefits when prescribing by considering the following. First of all, there is a valid need for the drug by the mother. Also, there is a potential effect on the drug on milk production, because we know that this could also affect the breastfeeding. Important to know if there is information about which is the amount of the drug excreted into human milk, the age of the infant, the extent of oral absorption by breastfeeding infant, and the potential adverse effect by the breastfeeding infant. As a result, every medication that the mother should take must be considered separately and is possible medicine with short half-life or high maternal protein binding, low oral availability, and high molecular weight should be used always. Breastfeeding mothers should use the lowest effective dose for the shortest possible time frame. And for medicine with a short half-life, feeding the infant immediately prior to mother taking the next dose will reduce the drug exposure in a really important manner. To continue with the important topic that is the drug excretion into breast milk, we know that the extent of drug excretion into human milk may be unavailable, and for many drugs, the information is only limited to data from animal study. And we also know that these preclinical models for determining drug excretion into milk are very unreliable because marked difference between the milk composition and the transporters that the animal has compared to human beings. The principle of drug passage into breast milk are well established, including both passive diffusions and carrier mediated transporter for more than 50 years now. We also know that most medicine are excreted in breast milk to some degree, but usually the amount is less than 10%. And medicine excreted at less than 10% are usually considered compatible with breastfeeding. Amount depends on several factors such as viability, plasma half-life, lipid solubility, molecular weight, or molecular size. As all of medicine has a combination of these factors, and also that the composition of the milk change with time, there is a variability in medicine transfer into breast milk, and we should always take this into account. And now I will continue with what is happening with the infant that is breastfed. So the types and rates of adverse event experienced by breastfed infants has not been well defined. Information about drug use in lactation women is often collected during post-marketing periods and unfortunately are collected at a lesser frequency than information during pregnancy, sometimes for regulatory reasons. Only few comprehensive reviews on the literature on infant adverse reaction from drugs in breast milk have been published. Studies show that safety is related to the age of the infant as drug metabolism and clearance is reduced in the newborn. The exposure poses the great risk to premature babies, newborns, and babies who are medically unstable or have poorly functioning kidneys. Important to mention that 60% of all the reported cases for adverse event were in neonates, so in babies less than 1 month of life. 80% were in infant 2 months of younger, and only 4% of the reported adverse reaction occur in infant older than 6 months of age. The breastfed infant should be always monitored for potential adverse events, and most commonly regarding sedation, gastrointestinal effect, rash, and irritability. Adverse events identified so far are mostly immediate effects on child. For example, the sedation, irritation, or any kind of gastrointestinal disturbance. Fortunately, serious acute adverse drug reaction from drug in breast milk appear to be really uncommon. We know that some group of drugs are drugs of concern, like free iodines, opioids, and of course the use of multiple central nervous system drug used simultaneously. Healthcare providers should always report this adverse event to health authority, including the generic and brand name of the drug, the maternal dose and mode of administration, and of course, if they have this information, the concentration of the drug in milk and maternal and infant blood in relation to the time of ingestion, the method used for laboratory identification, the age of the infant, and of course, all the details available regarding the adverse event. Such spontaneous report that we mentioned before might substantially increase the knowledge regarding the drug transfer into human milk and the potential or actual risk to the infant. As I mentioned, we have fortunately several excellent resources for healthcare provided, including the current product labeling of the drug and several peer-reviewed databases like LACMED. We will discuss LACMED in a minute. Also important to mention that in some rare situations, the consultation with a specialist might be indicated, particularly when the use of any radiopharmaceutical, oncologic drugs, or other therapy not addressed by current evidence is really needed. So one of the most important resources that we have is LACMED. This is a database from the NIH in United States. And this is a huge database that contains information on drug and other chemicals for breastfeeding mother. And the important thing here is that it includes information on the level of substance in breast milk, infant blood, possible adverse effect, and also could suggest therapeutic alternative where appropriate. All data come from scientific literature and are fully referenced. So it's a really trustful source. A peer review panel review all the data for scientific validity and currency. And you could see here on the right side of the slide that you could also have the Naranjo probability scale in order to see which is the causality relationship with the drug, and also when this information was updated. So the last revision date will help you in order to know if this is something that is really new for this drug. Also, we have another sources that available worldwide. So we have, for example, mother to baby initiative, the Infant Risk Center that also provide up-to-date evidence information of the use of medication, the Breastfeeding Network in the UK. So you have a lot of resources, and also will be important if you could check in your countries if your health authorities, or even if you have a national consortium that have more information regarding your country itself. So, and now I will give you some key takeaway message for this topic. We know that currently we have limited information available on drug use during breastfeeding, that the benefits and risks in the mother and infant should be considered as well as the benefit or risk of harm of not treating the mother. The psychochemical characteristics of the medicine and breast milk composition finally determine the concentration in breast milk. Most drugs are secreting breast milk, but the risk to their infant seems really limited. Exception, as we have shown, are drugs that result in high level of exposure in the infant and those with substantial adverse event of the infant already reported. Where possible, the lowest effective dose for the drug should be used for the shortest possible period in this mother. And adverse events more commonly observed in nursing infants include sedation, gastrointestinal upset, and irritability. Post-marketing safety studies could usually be required when there is a safety concern or when new information is available. And for sure, the labeling must be updated immediately in these cases. Communication is of utmost importance to ensure that patients and healthcare providers make informed decisions about the treatment during breastfeeding. And all stakeholders will need to work together to proactively seek information to fill the current gaps in information, to provide safety information and secure information regarding the use of drug in lactation women. This change can only be accomplished through collaboration with all parties involved, so regulators, medicine developers, marketing authorization holders, healthcare providers, academics, patients, and women will and should work together in order to improve this gap. This is all from my end. So I thank you again to ISoP for the opportunity to participate in this really important initiative. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Santiago Schiaffino, for a very interesting topic to discuss in the second edition of our ISoP Patient Safety Day. This was really excellent. And yes, the advantage of breast milk should never be underestimated and should always be a consideration on the wishes of mother to continue breastfeeding and the right of the infant to receive it. But so a lot of medicines are not licensed to be used during breastfeeding because of the lack of the information. And so this is the ideas which we have to think of. Please be active and put your question in the chat pod, and our speakers will answer them during question and answer session. Now, without making you wait long, I would like to introduce our next honorable speaker, Dr. Gianluca Trifiro, full professor of pharmacology, University of Verona, clinical pharmacologist, pediatric oncohematology, Bambino Guest Children's Hospital, who will present this conference entitled Strategies for Ensuring Medication Safety. Dr. Gianluca Trifiro is a Doctor of Medicine with postgraduate degree in clinical pharmacology, Master of Science in Clinical Epidemiology, and Doctor of Philosophy in Pharmacoepidemiology. He currently works as full professor of pharmacology at the University of Verona. He is a member of the Scientific Secretariat of Post-Marketing Surveillance, Office of the Italian Drug Agency, and clinical pharmacologist of Phase 1 Clinical Trial Unit of Bambino Guest Pediatric Hospital of Rome. He is scientific coordinator of the Academic Master Program, Use of Real-World Data for Evaluation in Pharmacovigilance, Pharmacoepidemiology, and Pharmacoeconomics at University of Verona, and of the Working Group of Pharmacoepidemiology and Pharmacovigilance on behalf of Italian Society of Pharmacovigilance. He is a member of the steering group of the International Society of Pharmacovigilance and of the European Network of Centers for Pharmacoepidemiology and Pharmacovigilance of European Medicine Agency, and a member of Advisory Board of International Society of Pharmacovigilance. He is a field chief editor of Frontiers in Drug Safety and Drug Regulation, and a member of editorial boards of Drug Safety, Pharmacoepidemiology and Drug Safety, Biodrugs, and Clinical Drug Investigation. Author of more than 220 publications on international scientific peer-reviewed journals. Thank you so much, dear doctor, for joining us today. And I give floor to you for the presentation. Please.
Hello, everybody. Very happy to take part to this very important event, to the Patient Safety Day 2021. I'm Gianluca Trifiro, full professor of pharmacology at the University of Verona and ISoP advisory board member. The title of the presentation is about strategies for ensuring medication safety. This is my disclosure of interest, nothing actually related to the topic of this talk. With respect to the agenda, I'll be providing some information about where do we stand, or at least the major issues we have to be facing in a pharmacovigilance environment. Then I'll be sharing with you some consideration and also some initiatives concerning utilization of healthcare data for ensuring medication safety. And then the last part of this talk, I will touch a little bit on the importance of correct risk communication. So what we have seen in the last decade is the introduction into the market of highly innovative medicines that changed dramatically the course of life-threatening diseases, and this holds true also in the current pandemic, where we have seen accelerated approval of vaccines as well as monoclonal antibodies anti-spike, so anti-SARS-CoV-2. Here in this slide, it's depicted the number of biological drugs that have been approved by FDA in the last 20 years. And it's important to highlight that in the last 2-3 years, around 30-40% of the marketed drugs are classified as biological drugs based on the application of biotechnology, and these are in general much more complex drugs as compared to the chemically synthesized drugs. Those drugs have been mostly, in particular monoclonal antibodies, have been approved for oncology, for autoimmune diseases, but you can see in this graph that also other therapeutic areas have benefited of the introduction of innovative biotechnological drugs. From a pharmacological perspective, these drugs are much more complex. You can see here the comparison of the molecular mass of chemically synthesized drugs like aspirin, having 180 Dalton as molecular mass, as compared to the biological drugs, in particular monoclonal antibodies, having more than 150,000 Daltons and quaternary structured protein that also have post-translational modification that makes those drugs also specific from a safety point of view. There is an issue of, for instance, immunogenicity and other issues concerning infections and cancer that are not encountered by chemically synthesized drugs. So we also can appreciate from the pipeline concerning biological drugs specifically that there is a large number of product of categories. Most of them are innovative. We have RNA therapies, we have recombinant proteins, we have advanced therapy medicinal products like cell therapy, gene therapy, more and more into the market. And with respect to the pharmacovigilance, we'll be facing completely new scenarios with long-term, if not lifelong, assessment of the safety that will be required for those therapies. And with respect to vaccines specifically, we all appreciated the efforts of the scientific community in developing in such a short time vaccines against SARS-CoV-2, applying a lot of well-known and innovative approach, ranging from inactivated vaccines, live attenuated vaccines, to DNA vaccines, and more interestingly, the RNA vaccines that all we know are the ones that have been marketed as the first vaccines, consisting of RNA encoding the spike protein and packaged in the lipid nanoparticles. And those approach can be used also in other therapeutic areas other than vaccines. So we will have more and more innovative medicines and vaccines in the market, and as a pharmacovigilance community, we'll be facing a new challenge concerning post-marketing surveillance. There are other well-known and traditional issues that we need to face. There is the management of polypharmacy in older people. In this graph, you can see that based on the National Report on Medicines Use in Italy, that around 40 to 45% of all the people receive from 5 to 9 drugs every day, and around 20% receive at least 10 drugs every day. It's very difficult to manage those complex pharmacological therapies, especially for prevention of adverse drug reaction and drug interaction. And on top of that, we need to consider that more and more patients tend to use dietary supplements under the assumption, not always true, that they are always safe. And you can see here projection in 2028 indicated, for instance, in our country, in Italy, around 40% of all the people will receive dietary supplements. So we make the regimen, the pharmacological regimen of those patients even more complex. And we know that the larger is the number of drugs that are taken daily by the patients concomitantly, and the higher is the risk of developing adverse drug reaction, often due to drug-drug interactions. And so that calls for strategies for implementing in a scientific way the prescribing and medication review, especially in geriatric population. Another important point concerned the inherent limitations of pivotal randomized clinical trials that calls for proactive post-marketing surveillance. These are the average number of patients that were enrolled in pivotal clinical trials of drugs that were marketed in the last 10 years. And you can see that on average is 2,000. If you talk about, for instance, chronic medications, and the number of patients that were included in studies of chronic medications for at least 12 months, you can see here is really limited. So that confirm the idea that the safety profile of drugs and vaccines can be well assessed only in post-marketing setting, and that has been even more clear during the COVID-19 pandemic with the conditional approval of the vaccines, where despite the enrollment of around even 30 or 40,000 persons in the pivotal clinical trial, still some important safety issues have been detected only when the vaccines have been marketed and administered to millions of people. We have nowadays huge opportunities from the large amount of electronic data that will overwhelm us, basically. There is a lot of potential value in this data for ensuring medication safety. I will show you some examples. We start from this. This is a statement from a good friend of mine, Sabine Strauss, is the chair of the PRAC at the European Medicine Agency, the disaster-driven pharmacovigilance. If you think about that, pharmacovigilance was born based on the thalidomide disaster, and was the system, the pharmacovigilance system was reevaluated following some disasters. So some lessons that we were supposed to have learned based on the withdrawal of important medications. Here you can see rosiglitazone, but more importantly, the Vioxx story that highlighted the importance of being more proactive in ensuring medication safety, and not only relying on passive or spontaneous reporting system. What we have done, we had a look in depth at the information and at the sources of information that were considered for around 20 drugs that have been withdrawn from the market in the last decade. So we really analyzed what was the trigger for the withdrawal. You can see here that most of the situation case reports that is meant in this case the spontaneous reporting system was the driver of the withdrawal of the drug from the market, while in around 25% of the cases, observational data were used or at least played a major role for the drug withdrawal. So that means that spontaneous reporting system is and will remain the main source of data for taking decisions on drugs, even withdrawals, leading to withdrawals. On the other hand, there are some cases in which we need to use to have access to other source of data, like indeed observational data. And there is another issue that is the need to accelerate the time that is needed for processing safety signals, leading to a final decision on how to minimize risk. As I mentioned earlier, we are basically overwhelmed by health data. Just to give you an idea, 90% of the world's healthcare data has been generated in the past 2 years. And every 2 years, the healthcare data tends to double. Most of this data are structured and they're accumulated altogether. They are more than 150 exabytes. It's really an enormous amount of health data. Of course, it's important to put in place approach for correct access, analysis, and interpretation of those data to generate information for informed regulatory decision. And one of the most, say, used term in healthcare this time is big data. With big data, we mean high volume of data that are generated very fast, with a high degree of heterogeneity, and also with the need of adopting an innovative approach. And healthcare data falls perfectly into this definition. And you can see that in scientific literature, you can see a number of editorials, commentary, and other publications discussing the importance of big data in pharmacovigilance. Even more important to underline that the European Medicine Agency, with the head of the National Medicine Agency Association, created a joint big data task force to promote the use of big data in post-marketing surveillance. And there are a lot of initiatives out there. So this it's a very good, let's say, example of how big data will be increasingly considered also for regulatory importance. When we talk about healthcare data we need to think that we have a very broad spectrum of data we can have access to for post-marketing surveillance, ranging from drug and disease registries to claims data, electronic health records from primary care or from secondary care. And then we have also all the increasing amount of patient-derived data that are generated via smartphones or other digital tools that will be increasingly used in the future and that are promising in terms of source for generating very important data for the assessment of post-marketing assessment of drugs, especially with respect to patient-reported outcomes. So the disaster I was talking before and the huge amount of data available led to a more proactive approach in post-marketing surveillance and monitoring that is mostly based on network of claims and electronic healthcare records, claims database and electronic healthcare records. In US, there is Sentinel. In Canada, there is KNOBS, a number of initiatives in Europe and Asia that allows a more rapid, really real-world evidence generation to support drug regulatory decisions, As an example, this is a European committee-funded project around 10 years ago. It's called Uadr, that was aimed at creating a network of databases for signal detection and validation. And you can see there were in yellow 8 different databases located in 4 countries, collecting altogether around 50 million data data on a population around 50 million across 4 different European countries. And we use this network to explore what we would have contributed with this database network at the times of the virus story, at the times of the rofecoxib, with respect to the assessment of rofecoxib cardiovascular safety. So in those databases, we accumulated already in 2001 enough exposure via prescription and dispensing recorded in those databases, enough for assessing relative risk of Q of myocardial infarction. It was a reason why the drug was withdrawn from the market. And you can see that pulling together all the data from those databases, in fact, in the second trimester of 2001, we would have been able to detect almost 3.5 increased risk of myocardial infarction in patients exposed to rofecoxib as compared to the patients that were not treated with rofecoxib, so versus non-use. And interestingly, at the end of 2000, there was the publication of the Vigor trial. It was a pivotal clinical trial for rofecoxib that showed a 5-fold increased risk of cardiovascular thrombotic events as compared to naproxen. And at that time, the interpretation of that result was that naproxen was cardioprotective and was not rofecoxib cardiotoxic. If we would have had this database network at that time available and in place, we would have demonstrated almost 4-fold increased risk of rofecoxib versus non-users of rofecoxib. So in this way, we would have counteracted this wrong statement, and probably we would have contributed in accelerating the process of withdrawal of the drug from the market that occurred only 4 years later, at the end of 2004, on the voluntary basis of the manufacturer. So this shows clearly the potential of setting up distributed database networks for marketing surveillance, and in the end for ensuring medication safety. But do we always need big data? It seems that there is a big data hungry approach. So everybody is looking for big data, for accumulating data. And I'll show a couple of nice examples. This is the largest pizza ever. This is the largest sushi ever. This is the largest burger ever, even the largest salad ever. So a lot of business, a lot of incredible example, and a lot of Guinness. And you can see that in this study, it was conducted a couple of years ago, it was demonstrated that shrinking the size of the dinner plate may have been a very effective strategy for reducing childhood obesity. So what I want to say is that not necessarily having access to a large amount of data would lead to improve the assessment of safety. As an example, natalizumab, monoclonal antibody that was initially approved for the treatment of multiple sclerosis and Crohn's disease, was temporarily withdrawn from the market because there was a signal of progressing multifocal leukoencephalopathy that was identified based on 3 reports that were received from spontaneous reporting system. So based on that, there was a temporary suspension of the drug, and then there was a global risk management program implemented, and the drug was reintroduced. So that means that even a few cases sometimes may lead to important decisions on drugs. And also, it's important to remember that advanced tools and large data sources will never be able to replace thorough clinical observation of pharmacovigilance trained experts. So the system of signal management will never be completely automatic. So expertise, experience in pharmacovigilance will be key in the process of post-marketing surveillance, and to remind us about the risks about having access to huge amount of data and running script and running analysis of those data. There is this statement from the former president of the European Medicine Agency that big data enable us to generate a lot of conclusions, but then we need to be really able to discriminate whether those conclusions are really causal relationship to spurious coincidence. And spurious coincidence may have a dramatic impact on the life of a medicine. The last part of this talk concern risk communication. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic showed us very clearly how important is to provide timely, appropriate, clear communication about benefit and risk associated to drugs and vaccines, especially in a period of healthcare emergency as the one that we have gone through and we are still going through. As an example, and I apologize if these examples are in Italian, we should rethink about what we should communicate and when we should communicate, because we have seen continuous promotion of drugs or dietary supplements as a potentially life-saving therapies in COVID-19. Here you can see lactoferrin. You can see other medicines that have been promoted. Then the last box, the president of a region, based on the results of an observational studies with a lot of limitations, also stated that a drug that is approved for prostate cancer may have saved thousands of lives, while the vaccines were still not into the market. So we're waiting for the vaccines entering the market. So that was in the autumn of 2020. Of course, this drug has never been used for treating COVID-19, but we have seen thousands of medicines that have been promoted in the media as a potentially life-saving, as potentially effective drugs in COVID-19, sometimes also leading to inappropriate use of medicines by patients, and the list of those drugs that have been off-label used for treating COVID-19, sometimes as a self-medication, is really long. And most of those drugs were promoted based on the only in vitro evidence. The example of hydroxychloroquine is very important because those drugs basically demonstrating having no effect in vivo in hamsters in a recently published study in which favipiravir was compared to hydroxychloroquine, while high doses of favipiravir demonstrated the antiviral effect against SARS-CoV-2. This in vivo study demonstrated no effect of hydroxychloroquine against SARS-CoV-2. So in vitro studies showed benefit, while in vivo studies didn't. But this study, of course, came after already the drug was used in thousands of patients with COVID-19. And also very important to clarify who has to communicate on drugs. This is a tweet from Donald Trump, former USA president, about hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. He claimed that two old medication would have saved us from COVID-19. Unfortunately, as a consequence of this fit, there were a couple of poisoning and also some people died because they took as preventive approach the chloroquine that were available for other use in their houses and they got poisoning. So it's very important that the communication is not conducted primarily via media and especially by non-expert people. But on the other hand, it's very important to inform properly patients and to inform also healthcare professionals, because the healthcare professionals are the ones keeping relationship with the patients. This is a very nice editorial from the head of the Italian Drug Agency, highlighting two important issues. One, that in situation like healthcare emergency, it's even more important to promote high quality, large collaborative studies, of course, primarily clinical trials, but I would say also large scale observational studies, and also communicate and routinely update information on the basis of best available evidence on efficacy and safety data, and communication should address both healthcare professionals and citizens. And with respect to that, I think ISoP provided a very important contribution. These are two infographics that have been not only published on COVID-19 vaccine safety and also on the use of on using medicine safely during the COVID-19 pandemic, not only published, but also translated in several languages that allowed those infographics to be distributed all over the world. And I think scientific society as ISoP, of course, has responsibility in promoting correct information. So this was a very, I think, nice example of proactive communication about risks associated to vaccine and drugs. Also, as mentioned earlier, it's important to promote collaborative research, large scale, to address some research questions that needs to be addressed urgently. And everybody remember at the beginning of the pandemic in March 2020, there was a discussion about the potentially detrimental effect of ACE inhibitors as a risk factor for COVID-19 and for SARS-CoV-2 infection and COVID-19 poor prognosis based on the assumption that there was an increase in ACE2, and this is the entrance of the virus in the human cell. So all of these were speculation based on some in vitro evidence. Luckily, most of the scientific societies published very quickly and consistently recommendations about not switching cardiovascular patients who were well controlled with ACE inhibitors to other antihypertensive drugs. But also it was important to generate evidence very rapidly. And for instance, in this case, we've been able really around 1 month from the beginning of the pandemic to get together data from multiple regions and to explore data from 43,000 COVID-19 patients hospitalized in several regions. We created a network of databases and developed tools that allowed us to analyze in the end more than 40,000 patients. And we could demonstrate that in COVID-19 hospitalized patients using ACE inhibitors or other antihypertensive drugs was not associated with any risk of death associated to COVID-19. So it was not the ACE inhibitor was not a risk factor of poor prognosis in COVID-19. So, and on top of this, there were probably 30, 40 studies, real-world studies that have been published in such a short time. Another example of how important is the correct communication concern biosimilars. So I'm not going to provide the definition of biosimilars because nowadays it's a very common term, but still there is a lot of reluctancy and a lot of skepticism of some healthcare professionals and patients with respect to receiving biosimilars in several countries, in particular in some specific therapeutic areas. You can see a lot of these surveys in scientific literature, and also it's very important. I highlighted how much important is the patient acceptance, and as a consequence, it's important the healthcare provider education first, but also educating the patients about the value of biosimilars. And I remember when in Brussels, the European Commission presented for the first time in collaboration with the European Medicine Agency this guidance on the biosimilars, and they presented this guidance saying that the European Commission was not in favor or against the biosimilars, but was in favor of correct information on biosimilars. So, and I think this is a really important point. We need to deliver correct and appropriate information about benefit and risk of all medicines and vaccines. In particular, at the moment, there is a lot of discussion in the scientific community about the interchangeability, so the possibility of exchanging the originator with the related biosimilars and vice versa. That is different, I mean, that would allow eventually automatic substitution, which is different from the switching that is an active action from the prescriber himself or herself. So we are discussing about the possibility of switching or automatic substituting originator with biosimilars. And this is going to be very complex issue because we have multiple biosimilars for the same originator. We have also modified originators having different route of administration, for instance, trastuzumab or rituximab. But now we have the subcutaneous formulation as originator and intravenous formulation as both originator and biosimilars. So it's a very complex issue. The only way we can address is correctly providing correct information and intensifying post-marketing surveillance, again, benefiting of the availability of a huge amount of data. With respect to that, I'll show you the Valore project network that is aimed at developing a distributed database network for post-marketing surveillance of biologics, including biosimilars. One of the issues to be investigated by this network is the interchangeability of reference product and biosimilars. You can see here most of the Italian regions participated in this project, 16 regions covering around 50 out of 60 million Italian citizens, where we linked all the claims data, and we linked also the claims data with different clinical registries. So we supplemented claims databases with clinical relevant information derived from different clinical registries. You can see in them we accumulated data on more than 160,000 biological drugs and around 20,000 biosimilars. You can see here the number of users of biologicals by year. So this is the accumulated, the total accumulated number of users, and here is expressed as total person years of exposure is 500,000 person years of exposure. Really huge amount of data that allows us to investigate most of the biological drugs that are approved for immune-mediated chronic inflammatory diseases. And around 20,000 switches between originator and biosimilars. So that means that we are in the position to generate evidence to support less, of course, the interchangeability between biosimilars and originator. Here you can see the 3 biological drugs that have already the biosimilars in the market with around 20,000 people that switch from originator to biosimilar and vice versa. With these numbers, it will be increasing because more recent data will be added and other regions will be joined. So I think in this talk, I was able to show that the increasing availability of a very large amount and very huge heterogeneity of electronic healthcare data coming from different sources, together with the development of powerful analytical tools, represent really extraordinary opportunity for setting up systems for large-scale systematic post-marketing surveillance of both vaccines and medicine, as has been done already in some parts of the world. And I referred before to the Sentinel system in the USA as an example. It's important, however, to keep in mind that data scientists have to collaborate with pharmacovigilance experts, pharmacovigilance officers, especially when we come to the area of post-marketing surveillance of drugs and vaccines. Because for the safety signal management, it's not enough to apply, say, powerful analytical tool to large amount of data, but it's also important to analyze and interpret correctly the findings, and this has to be done by people with experience and expertise in pharmacovigilance and medicine in general. So it's not going to be an automatic approach, pharmacovigilance, surveillance, and in general the signal management. But it's, of course, having access to huge amount of data and analyzing and interpreting correctly the results generated by the analysis of this data, of course, may support assessment, rapid assessment on drug and vaccine safety. Also, it's important to generate real-world evidence, so that means analyze and interpret correctly real-world data from the own local regional environment in certain for certain therapeutic areas in particular, to increase confidence of healthcare providers and patients about vaccines and drugs, and biosimilar is an example. And finally, with respect to the communication, I think that timely, consistent, simple, credible, and exhaustive information about benefit and risks related to vaccines and medicines that is properly communicated to the patient, but I would say also to the healthcare professionals, it's more effective than a well-conducted randomized clinical trials. This is quoting Bernard Begot. So we need all to put efforts in communication and let's communicate regulatory bodies, scientific societies, to healthcare professionals and patients to ensure vaccine and medication safety. That was my last slide, and I thank you for your attention, and I'm very happy to take part to the discussion.
Thank you so much, dear Dr. Gianluca Trifiro, for this relevant, detailed, and very interesting presentation. I have to say that a lot of valuable information we heard today, and also it led us to have a proactive approach in making decisions, risk minimization. However, as it was worth mentioned, sometimes it is not necessary to have access to large data to be able to improve the assessment process of the safety for certain medicines. And even a few cases may really be enough to make a decision. So please be active, continue writing your questions in the chat pod on the left. And now we are moving for a question and answer session. I would like to invite our two speakers to answer some of the questions from the audience. And we have received a lot of questions today, and I hope we'll manage in the time. So my first the first question is addressed to Dr. Santiago Schiaffino. The question is, what kind of participation could be given to pregnant and or breastfeeding women during the drug development stages, taking into account that the ethical implications do not allow their active participation? Please, doctor, answer to this question.
Thank you so much for this question. I think that is a really interesting question. So if you, and I put all the links in the presentation so you could go and check the reference, but it's clear what is in EMA or FDA about this. So it is clear that involving women and pregnant or during breastfeeding during the earliest stage of the development perhaps could have some risk, but after phase 2 entering into phase 3, when you have more information about the drug, it would be really useful to include this population. Of course, that if there is some value of develop this drug for this kind of population, and we need to think the other way around. So it's unethical to exclude the population when you know that the drug could be useful and you didn't identify any safety concern. And I think that this is something that the health authority are working on in order to be more inclusive, because the easy way is to restrict this population during the development, but we need to think the other way around and to be more inclusive. And I see that this is something that changed during the last 5 years. And you see, for example, IMA during 2020, or this recent workshop from the FDA in 2021, when the direction is completely changing. I hope that this answers the question.
Thank you so much. And the next question is also for you, dear doctor. It's why is that breastfeeding decrease depression?
Sorry, could you repeat?
Yes, of course. The question is about the breastfeeding and depression. Yeah. Why the breastfeeding is decreasing the depression?
No, I think that this is the other way around. So it's it has been seen that one of the more frequent use of drugs during lactation is the depression, because this is one of the chronic disease, and also due to some diseases that are like postpartum diseases. This is the most useful, the most common indication for use drug. And there is some drug when it's clear documented that there is no need to stop the breastfeeding during this. And there is a really nice paper from the Academic of Pediatrics, I think that's 6 or 7 years so far, which there is a really nice table, which are the drugs that are proved to be used and that there is not risk to the newborn. And also, if you take into account the age of the infant, and also if you are not combining drugs, so there is a really valid possibility to continue or to treat women. And also, I think that one of the principles that WHO mentioned is that you always need also to consider which is the disease that you need to treat. So I think that if you follow all these points and you consider that there is not a lot of drug that could not be used, okay? So the drugs that are really contraindicated during the pregnancy are less than 10, okay? The other one with proper measures could be used, okay? So, and if you go into LACMED, this is a public database from the NIH in United States, you obtain all this information, okay? Also, there are strategies in where you could, if the drug could be taken just after that the mother breastfeed their child, there is also some lesser risk to have a problem with the baby. I think that you are mute, Naira.
Okay, sorry, thank you. So I would like also to just justify one of this question that also it was asked if the breastfeeding decreased depression in women, highlighting the importance of breastfeeding.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. Yeah, this is something. When you read also the you know that there is this document from UNICEF and all the points for this mother and baby hospitals, you know, one of the things that they mention is really that we should reinforce the breastfeeding, because this is a potential cause of depression from the woman. Yes.
So thank you. This once more emphasizes that how important this breastfeeding is for the woman and for the baby. I would like to address this third question also. Some OTC drugs should not be taken in pregnancy breastfeeding. However, being OTC, they can be used without control by these special populations. Is there any initiative like the ones you presented to us that is working to minimize the risk from these perspectives?
Yeah, I think that is a really good point.
Yeah.
I believe that there is some kind of initiatives in order to include a pictogram, you know, in where it is clearly that yeah, woman during pregnant or lactation should not take this drug. And yeah, I think that this is one of the initiatives that are more related to labeling, you know, not to other like other additional minimization measures for this kind of drugs. Yeah.
Thank you. And the next question is, do you have data on COVID-19 vaccines related to lactation? And the other question is, like, to gather these both questions, are their databases freely accessible?
Yeah.
Lactation, and are those databases freely accessible?
Yeah. So you have seen that during the presentation, I include 3 or 4 references in where you could go directly and check. And this is not only including the drugs, it also includes vaccines. And yeah, it's completely free. It's an initiative from usually are private and public consortiums. So while the NIH clear is something public, but you have also in the United States and also in UK some initiatives that are being done with the contribution for also pharmaceutical companies and other foundations that are supporting this and are completely free. So I detail more the NIH one because perhaps it's the one that with more more years, but all the sources are reliable. And they have a really nice reference where this information was taken from. And also another nice initiative in Europe is from the Imi Consortium, and you could go there and check the information and all the work that they are doing. And they have also important information about vaccinations. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Santiago Chiafino. I will go to the questions for Dr. Gianluca Trifiro, and if we have the time left, I will come back to you again. Thank you so much for your detailed for the first question is for Dr. Gianluca Trifiro is how should we overcome the analytical challenges involved in data mining, like the lack of established standards and validation methods, confounding variables, false signals, data, etc. Wouldn't those issues affect the application of big data?
Thanks a lot. This is a great question. I think it requires a lot of time to go in depth, discuss properly about that. But well, what I can say just synthetically is that it's very important to set up expectation about data mining of large amount of data, big data, because as I mentioned also in my presentation, the impact of identifying spurious signals may be really dramatic. And we have examples of some examples from previous years. So first of all, the most important is again to define what are the reasonable goals we can achieve with data mining of big data. I think this is, let's say, tricky, especially in terms of signal detection. We learned on how to use a large amount of data for signal strengthening and validation. While there are a number of initiatives that have been carried out in the last years about using large networks of healthcare databases for signal detection that provided interesting results that confirm that at the moment it's basically impossible to incorporate systematically in routine pharmacovigilance activities data mining of big data. On the other hand, they can of course generate interesting information that requires additional validation. And as for the spontaneous reporting databases, we need to put in place a triage system that can filter out those signals that are likely to be spurious. And we can provide additional information to prioritize the signals that are initially detected through data mining of big data. So there are a number of analytical approaches, but what makes more sense to me is to consider those approaches as semi-automatic. So expertise in pharmacovigilance is always essential. So it's important that if there is a list of potential signals identified through data mining of big data, is then I mean, has to undergo to this triage system, and more importantly through revision from pharmacovigilance trained persons that can also, let's say, better analyze and validate the signals. Also, for instance, having a look at biological plausibility and other criteria for validating the signals. So I'm not sure this answered fully the question, but the main message is that at the moment we cannot apply systematically in routine pharmacovigilance activities data mining of big data for signal detection, while definitely we may have more help from this analysis of big data for signal strengthening and validation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gianluca Trifiro. Please, if you need more questions, put your questions in the chat bot, and we will try to answer during this session, or will be hang at the question and answer list of ISoP web page. So the next question is how leadership and communication affect safe or unsafe use of medicines. This is also a question for Dr. Gianluca Trifiro.
Well, I think COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the importance of providing timely, appropriate, and consistent information. It's really important that this information is provided by entities that are entitled to that are acknowledged as a credible source of information. Because I mean, of course, the large use of social network, I think, created a serious issue with respect to that, because it's not clear anymore what is the source of information, and sometimes I mean, the ones that are supposed to provide information are not identified as a credible source of information. So it's really important that scientific society and regulatory agencies invest efforts systematically to build system for correct and timely communication about benefit and risk of drug and vaccines. But this should be done, I think, outside of the healthcare emergency context. I think credibility has to be built over time. With respect to that, I think ISoP has put a lot of efforts historically. Only in this way, I think the scientific society or regulatory agency can be considered credible. So investing energy in communication, correct communication on drugs and vaccines over time, consistently, systematically, I think increase the confidence of the public audience on those entities, on scientific societies and regulatory bodies. I think we have seen some good examples about that, but I think this has to be done systematically and especially also outside of the context of healthcare emergencies.
Thank you. And yes, we should never underestimate the value of the communication. And also we have a lot of interesting questions. I have to say a row of questions on communication. What strategies work to strengthen risk communication? What should be done to strengthen the risk communication?
What I mentioned earlier, I think what is critical is inconsistencies in communication, and also not identifying what is the source of information that can be considered credible. So there is a need for mostly from regulatory bodies, regulatory agencies, in creating systems for providing information not only to the patients through campaigns, but also to the healthcare professionals systematically. And nowadays, also the use of social media is to be taken into account, because the way we communicate, the way we access information has been changed substantially in the last years. So again, I want to repeat what I already mentioned, but I think the best strategy for risk communication is to invest in systems for providing correct and timely information to healthcare providers and patients always over time, and building confidence of public audience over time. So should not be reactive communication, but should be proactive communication. So always outside of emergencies as the one we are living.
Thank you. And again, one more question on the communication. How we can promote patient engagement to improve risk communication?
Well, probably
engage patients.
Yeah, well, I think we have a lot of patient organization. For instance, in Italy, we created a network for monitoring COVID-19 vaccine effects as adverse reaction, but also as a lack of efficacy. And we involved also patient organization, especially organization of those patients at higher risk of developing COVID-19. And we are sharing with them documents, involving them actively in the monitoring, and also addressing some of the issues that they encounter. So I think patient organizations have to be involved systematically. In Europe, at least, there are a lot of efforts in increasing engagement of patient organization in several committees at European medicine agencies. And I think this is really key for having a stronger engagement of patients, working with those patient organizations. I think it's the best approach I think we can have.
Thank you. And a question, what mechanism do you think should be implemented to generate appropriate, clear, and above all, patient-oriented risk communication to promote the safe use of medication and encourage the reporting of adverse events?
Well, I think the reporting of adverse reaction is something that has been promoted over time in the last decades. But I think it's very difficult to raise the bar and increase improve the attitude of patients in reporting adverse reaction. Again, there are several strategies. First, it's important to talk frankly about potential adverse reaction whenever a medicine is prescribed, and of course, this is in charge of a healthcare professional. I think we need to invest in culture about adverse reaction. We need to explain and clarify to patients that adverse reaction are parts of medicines, and a drug has to be used only if expected benefits are supposed to be greater than the risk. But the risks are inherent to any medicine, but also to any dietary supplement. So I think first investing in improving patient communication directly from healthcare providers. Second, campaigns are important in at least promoting the safe use of drugs. I think about antibiotic use. We have a serious issue at the moment because there is an overuse, inappropriate use of antibiotics that are supposed to be effective in COVID-19 treatment, and maybe they aren't. So sometimes campaign may be also effective. Involvement of patient organization, education, patient organization, but I think it's a cultural issue that have effect not only on patients, but also on healthcare providers. If an healthcare provider is not aware of the risk or has not the attitude to report adverse reaction, he or she will be likely to address the issue of drug safety with the patients when prescribing medicines. So I think it's important to invest in education at different levels and in academic environment and post-graduating environment. So first educating healthcare providers, and then healthcare providers, of course, educating patients. I think this is probably the best approach.
Yes, and thank you so much, dear Dr. Gianluca Trefiro. And closing the questions about the communication, I would like to ask the question that, as it was mentioned in presentation, the accurate communication is very important in the medication safety, and sometimes it can save or bring harm to, if not appropriately managed. What measures can be taken to reduce misinformation in medication safety?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. Probably just as a joke, probably we should shut down the social networks. Now, this is a joke. Of course, fake news and misinformation has to be strongly counteracted by scientific societies, by regulatory bodies. Again, also using properly and investing energy, also using social networks, because the pervasive effect and the efficacy of sources of miscommunication is incredible. So think about the Novaks. I mean, they have a lot of channels, a lot of strategies for disseminating the wrong information. So we really need to counteract it, probably studying also a little bit the way the information is communicated. But there is not just a unique approach. As I mentioned earlier, we need to invest in education first of the healthcare profession and then of the patients, having more engagement of patient organization, and establishing systems for providing correct information systematically. So using, of course, modern tools, so that includes also social networks.
Thank you so much, dear Dr. Gianluca Trefiro. Now I will ask a question, I would see what questions we have left, and maybe we'll come back to Dr. Santiago Schiaffino. In your presentation, you were talking about the compatibility of medicines and breastfeeding. We know that a small percent of medicines have information on effects of the medicine on baby and through the breast milk. So how is the drug compatibility with breastfeeding is measured?
Okay, and you have seen that in the presentation, there is the classical method to study this, perhaps with animal models, or also studying the quantity of the drug in milk. But the best approach is to do the tree method. And when you see the information that this Imi Consortium is working on, they are trying to use, of course, that animal model with all the limitations that we have said that they have, and also some in silico method, you know, using computers in order to extrapolate which is the amount. And one of the most important activity that they are doing is that they are collecting samples of breast milk from mothers that need to use or need to take these medications in order to obtain more information about this. And for this, of course, are measuring the amount of drug into the breast milk. So, and this has been proved to be the best approach to combine the three of them. And also it's important to notice that the usual way how we obtain this information is through post-marketing reports. Okay, so, and usually when the infant has some kind of adverse event, because the negative exposure is not being tracked, even it's not a regulatory requirement in most parts of the world. So I think that this is the best approach.
So do you think that the breast milk banks for babies offer a life-saving alternative? Can this be a solution?
Could you
for the
repeat
issue of medical? Yeah.
So could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, of course. What do you think, can the breast milk banks be a solution in case if mother have to use a medication?
Yes, for sure. And this is something that has been proved to be an alternative in a lot of countries, especially when you have these premature babies, and there is a lot, and this is safe because everything is being tested. So yes, for sure. And this is something that WHO is also recommending. Okay, of course, in a controlled environment, but yes, for sure.
Good. So it is very good, and there is an alternative approach to this issue. And here we have a last question. It is more practical, maybe. We often hear that physician advise breastfeeding mother to stop breastfeeding babies because she has to take some medicine. In this case, what is the best approach? What should be taken into consideration, especially taking into account that we have limited data on this? Also, breastfeeding is very important both for mother and for child. Do we have any best approach in this case?
Yeah, and what is recommended is that the physician should make the decision based on the best evidence available. And also one of the discussions to empower the patient, you know, so they could also participate in the decision when there is this kind of gap of information, you know, and also taking into account what we have said, the evidence from the drug, the age of the infant, also if the infant has not any other chronic disease that could decrease the way how the baby is is eliminating the drug. So there are a lot of variables that could be taken into account, and always try to avoid the easy decision or the easy recommendation to stop the breastfeeding, because it is clearly shown that when one mother need to interrupt the lactation for, I don't know, they have some acute illness and they should stop for some kind of days or even a week, reintroduction, the breastfeeding is something that is not always possible. And there are studies that are showing that almost 30% of the mothers that are discontinued the breastfeeding, even for an acute illness, will not restart the breastfeeding, So even though in this case, the physician should be always have in mind that the information should be something really, really well handled. And sometimes that we know that there is a limitation about information that is in the labeling, because sometimes pharma companies doesn't have the information there, but they should try to find out which is the best approach. Even though if you go into LACMED, there is an option that is providing to the physician to offer an alternative therapeutic decision, So for example, if some drug is proven to be not possible, they offer you which is an alternative drug that could be used and that is safe. So even though now we have this information available, so discontinuation, the breastfeeding should be the last decision to make.
Thank you so much for this detailed interpretation on such an important issue. And I think we have the last question for Dr. Gianluca Trifiro. It is about the data from the bigger pool of actual head database. Is it relevant to proceed and analyze data from the quality perspective to use the information in drug safety? What is your opinion on this?
Oh, if I understood correctly, the question is about the importance of assessing the data with respect to the assessment of the drug safety. Is that correct?
It is from the perspective of the quality of the information while assessing the drug safety from the big data, to use to look at the data from the perspective of the quality of data.
Okay, yes. Well, I think quality of data is essential. There is a way of saying that if we have a garbage in, we have garbage out. So, of course, whatever is the source of information we are going to use to explore post-marketing safety or benefit of medicine, it's important to ensure that the quality of data is good. And there are a lot of course, approach we can use from an analytical perspective. Whatever is the data source, there may be some errors, mistake, or even bias. So it's very important to invest energy before conducting safety studies in exploring the data we are going to use with a lot of descriptive analysis, benchmarking, and yeah, those big distributed database networks that are in place, like Sentinel, they implemented a huge amount of automatic quality check on the data, on the native data. It's important to have involved in the analysis also the data provider themselves, because they are the one knowing the best the characteristic of the data source. So it's very important to involve them. It's very important to have an understanding of the underlying healthcare system with respect to certain data source, so that we have clear what are the potential limitations of that source, and we eventually can address this in the analytical phase, or we just honestly realize that we cannot use a certain data source to address a research question, but it's really essential to invest time and energy on quality of data, on assessing quality of data source. And it's very important to engage also the data provider themselves that have the highest degree of expertise in using those data.
Thank you so much for your answer. So I think this was a great discussion on very important and interesting topics on medication safety. I would like to thank our speakers for providing very detailed answers to raised questions, and to thank all participants for the interesting questions and active participation, which made today's question and answer session very interesting. Thank you so much. And as was mentioned, a question and answer list will be published on ISoP webpage at www.isoponline.org in several days. And before closing the session, I would like to remind you that our next presentation will be from LATAM region. It will start at 8 p.m. UK time. We will have other speakers and topics. Please join us, and please remember, if you want to see again this webinar or any webinar on this Patient Safety Day, go to ISoP Online Facebook account or in ISoP YouTube channel. All the records from this event will be published on the next days. And at the end, I would like to thank International Society of Pharmacovigilance for organizing this very important conference. And also on behalf of the ISoP, I would like to thank to all of you for being with us today. Stay safe and have a great day. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for attending.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.